Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really beautiful, kind of haunting story called The Last Train to Ashwick. Let's get right into it.
So this is a story that really digs into the invisible ties binding us to the past. I want you to just imagine for a second, standing in the room of a departed loved one. You're surrounded by their belongings, right? The physical remnants of their daily life, and you can't help but wonder about the things they chose to leave behind. I mean, why did they keep that random old tin of buttons? Or that specific, worn-out map? There is this universal, deeply emotional experience in trying to decipher a life through the objects that somehow managed to outlast it. And you know, that is exactly where we find our main character, Eliza. She's standing in her mother's bedroom just days after the funeral, facing that massive, daunting task of sorting through an entire life.
And that brings us to the core friction of our story. Now, Eliza and her mother, they had a really warm relationship, but man, they had completely different philosophies when it came to their spaces. Eliza's approach? Very spare, very ordered. If it wasn't immediately useful, she tossed it. But her mother? She believed that objects earned their place simply by being used. It wasn't about hoarding or an inability to let go. It was out of a deep respect for the fact that these things held meaning, even long after the actual using had stopped. Just think about your own space for a moment. Are you a keeper of memories, or are you more of a clearer of clutter?
Well, this philosophical difference really comes to a head as Eliza systematically goes through her mother's chest of drawers. Eventually, she hits the bottom drawer, you know the kind, heavy, swollen with Devon damp and literally years of accumulation. As she starts peeling back the layers of her mum's life, she's finding exactly what you'd expect. Old birthday cards, a pretty clumsy drawing of a horse Eliza did back when she was 6, a folded map of the Lake District. Standard stuff, right? But then, buried beneath all of that, she discovers a single, startling anomaly.
It is an old, stiff, cardboard railway ticket. She actually has to take it over to the window just to read the faded ink. And the text says, "Single journey, London Paddington to Ashwick Halt." The crazy part? It's dated 30 years ago, literally the exact summer Eliza was born. Now, Ashwick Halt is this tiny, middle-of-nowhere request stop village deep in Devon. So you really have to ask yourself, why on earth would her mother buy a one-way ticket to nowhere at the exact time her daughter was bored, never actually use it, and then keep it safely hidden away for 3 whole decades?
Well, the mystery deepens even further with another discovery. She finds a bundle of 11 letters, all tied up with string, and they are all from a mysterious sender who just signs off as E. 30 years ago, E wrote to say he approved of her mother's courageous decision not to come. Then, over the next 3 decades, 9 more of these letters trickled in. They're just brief notes, checking on her garden, things like that, revealing this beautiful 30-year friendship that was maintained through quiet, incredibly consistent patience.
But honestly, the most impactful part of these letters is how every single one of them ends. For over 30 years, they all close with the exact same quote: "Come when you are ready, there is no hurry, there never was." The emotional weight of those words is just profound. I mean, it showcases a level of enduring patience and quiet love that Eliza genuinely never knew existed in her mother's life. It's an open invitation that somehow survived 3 decades of total silence.
So, faced with all this evidence, Eliza makes a choice. With just 4 days left before she has to head back to her sparse, ordered life in London, she takes that 30-year-old ticket, slips it into her coat pocket, and decides she's going to trace the path her mother never took. Which honestly brings up a fascinating question. What actually happens when you physically step into the unlived history of someone you love?
The journey itself really acts as a transition for Eliza. She starts on a main line, then switches over to a smaller branch line. And the mood here is just beautifully captured. The train moves westward with this deliberate, unhurried consideration through the deep Devon countryside. The pacing of the ride is slow, almost cinematic. As the train is rolling past these ancient hedgerows and quiet little villages, we can actually see Eliza's internal shift happening. She is moving away from the cold logistics of managing grief and finally moving toward uncovering the true texture of her mother's life.
And then comes the moment of truth. The train pulls into Ashwick Halt, which turns out to be barely more than a tiny wooden platform. And right there, standing out in the freezing November cold, is an old man. He watches her step off the train, does a sort of silent arithmetic with his eyes, and just says simply, "You have her eyes." This is Edmund, the mysterious E. Over a cup of tea in Edmund's warm, quiet kitchen, the missing pieces of the last 30 years finally start to come together. It turns out Edmund and Eliza's mother weren't secret lovers. They had met at university and were profoundly, deeply close friends. She had actually bought that ticket to visit his Devon cottage all those years ago. But right before the trip, she met Eliza's father.
She chose a different life, a happy one. Her letters to Edmund made it very clear she was deeply fulfilled. She didn't harbor any regrets. She simply made a choice to stay. But she kept the ticket anyway. When Eliza finally pulls out and shows him the unused ticket, Edmund isn't even surprised. He tells her, "I think she kept it because some things deserve to be kept, because they represent a decision you made and you want to remember that you made it." And that perfectly answers the question we started with today. Her mother didn't keep that ticket out of sorrow or longing, but to honor the absolute gravity of a life-altering choice.
Edmund then takes Eliza outside into his garden. Out at the edge of the meadow stands this beautiful 30-year-old rowan tree. Edmund had planted it the exact year she was supposed to arrive. And her mother, she had known about this tree for 30 years. She'd even written back saying she was glad it was a rowan and hoped it grew well. Standing right there, feeling the cold bark, Eliza realizes that this bare winter tree is basically a living monument to a friendship that survived entirely across distance and time. It really does make you wonder, doesn't it? Who might be holding on to a quiet memory of you somewhere out in the world?
All of this brings Eliza to a pretty huge realization. She looks at the right life, her mother's happy marriage, raising a daughter, tending a beautiful home garden, and then she looks at the unused ticket, this 30-year correspondence and a rowan tree in Ashwick. Eliza realizes that these truths don't contradict each other at all. A deeply fulfilling family life and a quiet, unvisited devotion to a distant friend, they can peacefully coexist.
So before Eliza leaves to catch the evening train back to London, there is this incredibly quiet, profound moment of resolution. She takes that 30-year-old ticket out of her coat pocket and just leaves it on Edmund's kitchen table. The ticket has finally reached its destination. She realizes that it belongs right there in Ashwick, completing a journey that literally took 3 decades to finish.
When she returns home to her mother's house, Eliza looks out at the dark garden. The house doesn't feel entirely empty anymore. She decides she isn't just going to sell it and leave like she planned. Instead, she looks at her mother's apple tree and says, "I will come back in spring." She plans to return, to tend the garden just like her mother did, and she decides to start writing her own letters to Edmund. She is finally stepping into the space her mother left behind, but with a totally new understanding of how to tend to the things and the people that truly matter.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. If our choices define us, how do the unlived paths quietly continue to shape the lives we love? I mean, every family has its own unused tickets, right? Its own hidden correspondences and unvisited rowan trees. What do you think you might find at the bottom of the drawer in your own history? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.